Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and Video Game News. Let's hop in. Today is Wednesday, January the 11th, and yeah, immediately as I started to sit upright and start streaming, I kind of felt a little allergic, I guess is what you might call it. Apparently, new solo mode in Yu-Gi-Oh! So hopefully I'll be able to get through all of this today. But yeah, it definitely does feel like the humidity and allergies may be up today. Which really, as I'm getting older and older, it seems to me like I'm getting affected by allergies way more. There's a new selection pack. We'll check that out in the shop. Although we really barely have enough. Let's see. There's a new secret pack. Throwing out a new secret pack with a new selection pack is clearly intentional. That almost certainly there's some card here that's super rare or ultra rare in this selection pack that would trigger this secret pack to unlock so that they try and get you for even more gold. There's also some new accessories. Looks like a protector and a playfield. They're just adding everything. And there's apparently been a change of terms of service specifically for California citizens. California being the United States that passes the most consumer protection laws, if anybody does, and tries to push the rest of the United States into similar consumer protection laws with their large populace and influence. There's also a bug if you actually care about that. Part of the other problem certainly is that staying up till like 3 or 4 in the morning is not in any way going to be helpful. And that's what I've been doing. Particularly last night I was playing No More Heroes and I've gotten to the 2nd ranked assassin, and there's a considerable amount of assassins that you have to fight. I guess you just have 33 days to get this one, so that actually makes for a better situation, doesn't it? Because unlocking it won't change anything. As far as how many of these cards I already got, yeah, there is definitely an argument to get at least a 10 pack of this when you can afford it, just to see if you can get some more super rares and ultra rares. And at least you could probably get 3 copies of most of the rares and almost certainly all of the neutrals. This art style here on that card is zoomed in so much that it just kind of stands out as not really looking like what you normally see in a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game card art. Almost all Yu-Gi-Oh! Card art is kind of like this, where it's just like one character in an action pose, not 2 characters in an action pose that implies a deeper story. So I've made the fatal mistake as far as playing No More Heroes, and that's why I was staying up last night playing it, in playing it on normal on PC. And in looking into discussions, there's a lot of complaints about it being buggy, and I'm not sure that right now I'm playing a fixed version of No More Heroes or if I'm just playing a partially fixed version of No More Heroes. I have seen some crashes, but not to any extreme amount. And I suspect there probably was a worse version there. That being said, the baseball minigame is nearly impossible on on the hard difficulty, or the normal difficulty, I guess is what you might really call it, because the hard difficulty is not even unlocked. The prompts are wrong in a few places, and there is just a complete imbalance, I think, as far as money and as far as well, this is just more and more things unlocked now, isn't it? As far as difficulty when you're playing it on the normal difficulty, and there's not anything that really fixes it. Like, as far as I know, and as far as I can tell, there's not some upgrade that in a new game plus you'd have twice the amount of strength or twice the amount of health or even more skill in playing the game. The game jumps around so much as far as what you're doing that it's highly unlikely you would get super good at the game. And yeah, it feels like at least a third of the bosses you think you would just have a normal fight around, you don't have normal fights around, and they're gimmick fights, which would be fine, but then when you throw a normal fight in, it has to be fairly easy to accommodate for that, and on normal difficulty it's just not really accommodating for that. It is really a prime example of how Wii games, particularly poorly ported to PC Wii games, can go wrong and were way easier just because you were playing with the Wiimote, or were just way easier. Alright, let's just go with this one then, I guess. Although we kind of have more time to potentially select one of these. Let's see, what was the actual new pack there? As far as the one they're talking about. Heroic Warriors. We'll go with Heroic Warriors. I mean, it's not even here. Oh, here it is. So this is the new pack that was just released. These are the ones that have less time around them. First thing to do though is just get these, just to get them off the table. And so for the first time in my life, I may very well have to use Cheat Engine, which I've never even used Cheat Engine, so I don't really know how to use it to just straight up cheat the game. I was going to potentially try and hack the save file to make an easier difficulty, but it's not in an easy hackable format. So that's a no-go. Yeah, the two choices I guess would be these two if you want to be logical about it, and we don't really even have enough at the moment to think about that. This one's probably not a good candidate, so if I was going to open anything, it would have to be this one. This is highlighting how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is more a game about purchasing and blind bag gotchaing than it is a game about actually playing the game. Yeah. Let's do this. We got one ultra rare. I think doing one pack might be about as good as we're gonna go. So yeah, it's just straight up hurting my fingers to play No More Heroes in the boss fights over and over again. There isn't a lock-on option, so you have to hold on to the left trigger to lock on the whole time, and in the boss fight you pretty much always have to be locked on. There's a point where you have to spin the right stick in circles, which always caused blisters and was always a stupid gameplay mechanic, quick time event thing, and there's no way around that. Also, in looking at the achievements and seeing that the percentage of people who have gotten all the achievements is less than 1%, because one of the achievements is to beat the game on the hard mode that isn't even unlocked. Like, I don't see a real reason why I would want to play the game in a new game plus mode. It would have to give me like double my strength. It would have to heavily like accelerate the experience. At the higher difficulties you get less money, so you, even on normal difficulty, the No More Heroes 1 really allows you to screw yourself over by trying to purchase all of the t-shirts and costumes, which are just incredibly overpriced and really shouldn't cost anything at all. They should be unlocks. Arguably, if collecting all the t-shirts slowly increased your health, you got like potentially 1 health pip for every 10 t-shirts you purchased, then you would have gotten about 10 extra health, which could go a long way. That would have definitely integrated that gameplay mechanic better and made a lot more sense. Otherwise, it just leaves you with this concept that only really works if you play the game on easy, then go into new game plus mode, then play it on normal, then go into play it on hard. Maybe you could skip to normal and just play it twice, but you need to play it on plus first just to get the upgrades and carry those over from one playthrough to the other, and then just unlock all the clothing on easy mode. But I just don't think normal mode or hard mode is probably balanced at all. And it is just, let's turn up the difficulty, even though we're not going to really play test it. I wouldn't be surprised if they barely play tested it on easy mode and then released it at that point. There's definitely an argument to double up here and go again. I guess the question though would be, should you potentially take a secret pack, since we've now unlocked so many secret packs, even knowing that the secret packs are going to give you less anyways. I think I'm mostly done with secret packs. Like, this one would be a decent candidate to go with, but most of these I have enough of them that you'd really just be scraping the bottom of the barrel. That's kind of a decent candidate also. Yeah. Each of these secret packs also very much confuse the issue, as far as you just don't really know whether these featured cards matter or not. Like, these could very easily be cards in the normal category and the rare category, even in the ultra rare and super rare category. They may just all be cards that are not really playable in the meta, and as such they may really not be worth your time. Let's see, I could do this one and just hope for an ultra rare here, and I'm not seeing an ultra rare pack, so unless I get lucky, then I'll have to open a second tin pack of this, and that'll be at the point where we leave it. No new cards at all, as far as the just Master Duel general summon pool. So these secret packs potentially get you a higher chance at cards that you may not have an opportunity to get otherwise, but they the trade-off on that is you're going to end up with a lot of cards that are duplicates that you're just going to end up eventually turning into crafting points, and that's not super helpful either. So yeah, to wrap up my accountability section, I am definitely not being satisfied with No More Heroes. There is just a huge amount of bad content in No More Heroes 1, even outside of its problems. Just a huge amount of grind, a huge amount of stupid fights that don't actually end up in a fight. It definitely it to me feels like one of two scenarios happened. Either Suda51 had a bunch of crazy ideas that he demanded in the game, and then Grasshopper Manufacturer was forced to put those ideas in the game, such as like catching cats and having a pet cat, and catching scorpions and scrubbing paint off the wall. Just every side job in that game just really has no reason to exist. And having an open world in general has no reason to exist, and having over 100 collectible t-shirts doesn't make any sense. So yeah, if it was either a case where Suda51 or somebody like Suda51, I'm assuming it's Suda51, was just making a bunch of demands / promises, and that is the reason that there's so much side content and so little fights in the game, and that a lot of the fights aren't even actual fights. Or the nicer theory could be, and certainly in that previous theory, it could be that Suda51 was actually the good director, and it's just everybody else at Grasshopper Manufacturer that was adding nonsense. Although that makes a lot less sense, that Suda51 would just be a nice guy director allowing other lower employees to create things willy-nilly. I guess I got a super rare in that, so that didn't trigger the need to open another 10-pack. Let's see, now I'm a little short as far as gems, so if I was going to decide to open this pack, which it's not a great candidate for that, I would need to get some more gems, and it's getting harder and harder to make gems free to play wise. This one is a interesting concept since there's so many of these special summon characters. Yeah, the nicer thought certainly though is that perhaps Grasshopper Manufacturer was hired to make a bunch of mini games and a bunch of boss fights, possibly for 2 or 3 different games in some project that got canceled. They had this work already done. They said, well, let's just merge it together and release our own game. I wouldn't be surprised if Grasshopper Manufacturer, like so many third-party developers, secretly has been in charge of making a lot of other games that people just they just never got the credit for. And that is the revelation that's going to need to start happening in video games, is we're going to need to have some real investigative journalists going back and saying, did you really work on this project? How much did you work on this project? What were the names of the third-party companies that were also working on this project? Let's get these credits right, because the credits have been a lie in video games since day one, since the days of credits, and before they weren't even bothering to credit people. And it really highlights just like the greediness and selfishness of capitalistic cronies and oligarchs, and just capitalism in general, in that you have a new industry like Atari, new companies making a new type of product like video games, and immediately the assumption comes down to, we're not going to credit anybody for anything. It's going to be this faceless, soulless corporation, Atari, that makes all video games. that is somewhat Japanese too, but it's just capitalism everywhere. Is that capitalism, and not to get into an economic rant, it really on its underbelly wants and thrives on removing any credits or any humanization of the worker or the underclass or the low level employee. It always spits on the lower level employee and the worker and says, no, it's the boss that does everything. It's the boss that's the job creator. And everybody should worship the boss. And they've taken it from being the boss being an actual human being to the boss being this faceless corporation, pushing the ridiculous narrative that corporations are people. But yeah, I don't want to get on a side rant just about No More Heroes. I don't know anything about Cheat Engine, so I'm gonna have to kind of, I think, be careful as far as I don't want to get my Steam account banned if I actually do have to use Cheat Engine. I'm not 100% committed to it yet. It is better as far as just video game criticism to power through it if you can, but we are really getting to the point where it's either going to be cheat or rage quit, and I would like to actually see the end of No More Heroes 1, because I do think No More Heroes 2 and 3 have some valid improvements there. It's not 100% surprising also that No More Heroes 1 is as rough as it is, considering how Killer 7 is basically the only game before No More Heroes 1 that they had made that is even slightly like a 3D game, and Killer 7 is incredibly rough too. So this may just be a case where Grasshopper Manufacturer in particular is just kind of not that good at making games, and honestly, assuming that they aren't secretly making third-party games and not getting credited for that, for the amount of years that Suda51 and No More Heroes and Grasshopper Manufacturer has been around, they just haven't made enough games in general. Like, there really is kind of an obvious statement there that they should have made 3 to 4 times as many games, even if they were just smaller projects. The idea that they have made maybe 2 visual novels and then they jump to Killer 7 and then they jump to No More Heroes is fairly ridiculous. I also want to put out the idea there, though, that there is very much this concept that I think gets thrown around of directors being geniuses, whether it's Suda51 or Kojima of the Metal Gear Solid, and that's that same capitalism thought too. Is like the director is taking all the credit when almost certainly does not really deserve all that credit, and we really need to stop doing that. Like the whole, I want to say Will Wheaton. I don't think that is the name of the guy, but he definitely was doing a lot of that. We definitely have too much of this hero worship type stuff that happens as far as game directors, and sometimes it's just somebody as simple as the person in charge of presenting things. It's even a little surprising when you have somebody like Major Nelson, who promotes himself quite a bit when he's not really doing anything in the video game world. He's just the person in charge of, I assume, proposing a merger that then gets handed down to a massive team of lawyers, and then being the figurehead and making the big decisions. But it is questionable how many big decisions he really even makes, because at a certain level, I wouldn't be surprised if there were higher Microsoft people above Major Nelson's that make a lot of decisions. And he also has kept seemingly all of the management in all the acquisitions that have happened so far. So he's not taking over the reins as far as running Bethesda, running ZeniMax, running Activision Blizzard. If you really look at like how much Major Nelson shows up as kind of a figurehead, he obviously doesn't have that much work on his plate. He's not in meetings all the time. If he can have his own podcast and things like that. Right. Is this going to destroy me? Yes, it is. Which, yep. That should put enough on the field to potentially continue playing. Assuming he just doesn't try and stop me that way. Is this guy gonna concede now? Well, I guess I already summoned something, so I have to then toss this way to get that back on the field. Activate this. Now, if he can stop that from happening, then I'd be somewhat screwed. But I don't think he can stop it from happening, because let's see. Well, this may screw me. I may be able to banish this card. Let's see. This guy still has one material on him. Right, that puts that in the graveyard. Well, that didn't work out greatly, but we'll see if that works out in the long run. As far as other things I've done probably since the last stream, I finished watching that Paradise Falls PD, Paradise PD animated comedy on Netflix. It's awful, and it ends on a cliffhanger, and they straight up admit it ends on a cliffhanger and says, well, we'll probably wrap this up in Farzad, which Farzad is another awful animated comedy show on Netflix. So there clearly is just like a team of people that they have writing these, and that they're paying, and probably overpaying, to write terrible comedy Family Guy clones. Like there's been far too high of a number of bad comedic shows on Netflix, in my opinion. That they're compared to like bad stand-up things where you're paying to just shoot 1 or 2 30-minute or 1 or 2 hour-long stand-up events, when you're getting like 12 episodes that have to be animated, that's gotta cost a lot more. And yeah, I just don't think the writing and the comedy is there. The only exception I would say is probably the big head people, which they have actual comedians like Nick Kroll heading that. So by him being allowed to do something that he almost certainly would have not been allowed to make on anything else, even like Comedy Central, he is probably taking a much smaller cut of pay to make something a little bit better. But yeah, I would definitely like to see more good comedies. But in all fairness, what is a good animated comedy anyways? They all go too long and get stretched out. You have a few good seasons of The Simpsons that people are nostalgic for. You have some early episodes of Family Guy people are nostalgic for, but the vast majority, I can particularly speak to Family Guy about, is you just kind of get a new episode every week and people remember the good stuff and don't remember the bad stuff. Plus, Family Guy in particular cheats in that they have very loose, ridiculous premises, so they're not trying to tell much of a narrative experience anyways, and they are just throwing out gags and jokes, which no other thing is doing. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend it, and I'm getting more to the point now on Netflix where I'm thumbs downing things. Does any of it really matter? No, because like these shows have long since been canceled by the time I get to them. So unless Netflix is going to react to feedback years later and learn their lesson, they've just canceled a significant amount of good shows. But honestly, over-the-air TV, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox has done the exact same thing. It's just Netflix is just catching up to be as bad as over-the-air TV, whereas one of the hopes around streaming services like Netflix would be the channels would be given more of a chance, that they wouldn't have to have as much of a viewership because they are coming as part of a subscription. But it's just not really playing out that way. Netflix still, I think, is doing a lot better than some of the other streaming services. Hulu is basically doing nothing. Amazon Prime is not doing anything that I like, and barely doing anything. Well, Amazon Prime has like Grand Tour and The Boys, but that's literally 2 shows over the course of many years now. Amazon Prime in general is this odd collection of features that nobody really wants any specific feature, but they overall are good enough that it kind of makes sense to keep Amazon Prime, except for free shipping, which is about the only thing people would want to keep. Why did I place 2 of these down? I was obviously not paying attention. All of this is kind of just a great argument towards I should make more footage and play more video games instead of watching streaming services and taking breaks like that. But I also have a problem with like YouTube at this point too, where there isn't a ton of new YouTube stuff I'm watching as far as new content. Well, there is a ton, but it's just not ever super particularly important stuff. It's just like, okay, let's see what this content creator has, and let's just move on. It's very much time-killing stuff. It's also incredibly consistent with the way CES has been, in that CES has just wrapped up and happened, and there's really nothing video game news related to talk about at all, because there's not going to ever be new announcements at CES. Like, Sony was showing off VR, a lot of people were showing off VR, but all the VR headsets outside of Sony's VR2, which maybe is a little bit cheaper, are incredibly expensive. Somebody was showing off some kind of like tactical gloves that would let you feel things in VR, which is definitely the direction that we need to go. But there's the price is just too high. A ton of smart home things announced, but you might as well just wait in those cases until the actual smart home products are out and you can actually test them. Like, I was messing with my Christmas light setup here, and half of that is still programmed in Chinese, and so I'm just having to figure out what it really means, if it really means anything. In particular, there's a slider that seems that is in English that says color temperature, but in moving it from 0 to 100%, it doesn't seem like it's actually changing the color temperature at all in the way I would understand what color temperature means. I might be confusing hue with color temperature, possibly, but that it's just very poorly programmed. There's about 25 pre-programmed colors, some of which the colors are actually staggered patterns of colors that you can set it to, but the slider actually goes all the way up to 100, so it just doesn't do anything if you set it to anything above 25. Now, in a lot of ways, I didn't realize he was going to do that. I should have canceled that. The controller I have now could potentially be reprogrammed at any point, or replaced totally, which is also a very likely possibility, as long as I have the standard 21, 28Bs or whatever they are, individually addressable LED lights installed. It's a small it's only a small challenge to change the controller out to something that's programmed better. Just banish that one. That wasn't much of anything. But yeah. So my point there in that side rant is that we are very much on the cusp of the technology being really good enough to use as far as smart homes just now in 2023, and they've been advertising smart home stuff for probably since the 70s. Matter should, in theory, work, but it only supports certain devices at a certain point. They're not getting super crazy or super useful with it. There's also a lot of medical nonsense, P-tracking devices and things like that, that they're advertising at CES, but almost everything at CES has always been just vaporware. It's just like, these are aspirational gadgets we've created one mock-up of to advertise our company more than to actually make a device that people would want. And certainly in the background of a lot of companies trying to move away from having any manufacturing or having significant amounts of manufacturing in China. Now, arguably, a lot of people, I imagine, will try to move away from China and just go to India or the Middle East or someplace even worse. There is a chance there that a lot of these cheap Chinese gadgets that were being resold outside of around the world will stop being made so much because nobody will want to actually deal with China to build them. Yeah. As many decades ago, Japan would have been the place to get your Sony Walkmans and your radios and things like that. Now decades later, how many things are actually being manufactured in Japan at all? It's pretty much nobody. Although I don't know if there was ever actually a lot of manufacturing happening even in the Sony Walkman days in Japan, or if it was not actually still just being made in China. There's something else I was gonna say. I'm really just rambling today. I'm also still wasting a lot of time. Wasted too much time on messing with my Wi-Fi router quality of service setup. I do think I've gotten that to the point where even through the VPN WireGuard tunnel, there's no latency stutter, although I don't know if it's really worth it. Oh yeah, the other thing I was gonna say, and I'll just throw this out as a rumor since it's video game, it's not even really video game related that much, is that last night there was a thread on Reddit suggesting that the WWE had been sold to the United Arab Emirates or one of the Middle Eastern countries that I think does have some level of influence on the WWE. Like the past couple of years, we've seen them do like SummerSlams or big events, maybe not SummerSlam, in the Middle East. This also being around the controversy of them trying to kick out Vince McMahon and Vince McMahon maybe selling it. Like there's just been a lot of rumors where I think Vince McMahon generally probably does own most of the WWE and could easily sell out his shares to the Middle East and check out. He's a pretty old person, so it wouldn't be surprised, but he's also being kicked out for like flirting with / having an affair with, I'm not even sure which. Like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Like, it's counting down, but I can't act. So I think what we've got here is a network problem. Like, it's just counting down forever to just draw. That's not fair. Alright. So if we can banish enough cards to make some progress here. Basically, the face down card is the one to get rid of without any real fear. Although maybe there is. Let's not chain with that one. And let's just see what happens. Okay. This would only let me summon 3. So what I'm gonna do instead is activate this. Now I will activate this. And in this case, I will summon this one, this one, this one, and this one. Summon this. I probably need to link summon something too, and I just don't do that very often with this deck. I should, when I have an opportunity, always choose to do that. Activate the effect of this. I'm gonna negate the effects of all face-up characters. Alright, well. Let's see. Which one's more important to destroy? That one, probably? Well, actually, if I had attacked this one, or this one, would I have won either way? Maybe. Yeah, 32. Yeah, I wouldn't have won either way. But I do think I am going to win here. Marvel Snap is doing a lot of things. I can't believe I'm still playing Marvel Snap. They're doing a series drop, which I just don't understand what that even means. Where Series 5 is dropping to Series 4, Series 4 is dropping to Series 3. I guess the general idea is maybe Series gives an idea as far as how likely you are to get these cards. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense. They're also doing patch notes and they're just like changing the game quite a bit while also adding a lot of like new art that they're still trying to sell. It is just like ridiculous as far as what they're trying to sell, and a lot of the art has to be very, it's like based on like specific side event or variant art for comics that most people wouldn't really react to even if they recognized it. In a certain way, I guess, yes, comic books, DC and Marvel in particular, could have been the heralds of many different artists doing many different art styles, but the truth is you have a fairly consistent art styles around all the big titles. Batman always, for the most part, looks like Batman, and the most diversity you get in art styles in Batman is often in cartoons or side things, and or live action, certainly. But yeah, I seriously doubt anybody who's like, I doubt there's that many people who think of like this variant cards by Alex Horley. I don't even know what you would really call the Savage Lands. The Savage Lands art style. I don't think that they are going to be happy about mixing the Savage Lands art styles of a few variants with like anime versions of art styles. And the anime versions here are, in particular, are going to be tease versions of art styles, because there is literally no anime arts. You know, they're retweeting Ben Brode. There literally is just no comic books that are in that anime style of animation. So yeah, that really is just a tease variant. Same is true for like this Happy New Year, where you have this art style. So it just makes it very inconsistent. Whereas the default advertising still is sticking with what you typically would expect from a comic art style. They're up to 40 million downloads also. So they go into further detail. It's been a month since we introduced Series 4 and 5 cards, and we're excited with the first ever series drop. With every series drop, some Series 5 cards will move to Series 4, and some Series 4 will move to Series 3. Series 5 cards will move to Series 4. What does that mean, though? Like, what is the difference between something being Series 3 or Series 4? When cards drop series, they become 10 times more common in the collector's reserves and much cheaper in the token shop. So it's just like, yeah, we've got these cards that were garbage cards people weren't really playing, and so we're going to make them cheaper. So they're just, once again, changing things. If you acquired a Series 5 card before it moves down a series, that card will show a first edition badge when you inspect it, which means nothing. Also, the token shop nonsense they are claiming to improve. The token shop, by the way, the third currency in Marvel Snap. They're really overly confusing everything in the menu of Marvel Snap because they have such an incredibly dumbed down game overall. It's ridiculous that it would take 80% of your thought processing to decide whether or not you want to upgrade or buy a variant on a card, and when you actually get into the game and play, it's just the same old pattern over and over again. Like, I literally in Marvel Snap have like one deck that I just do the same thing over and over again. If I get a daily quest that requires something particularly special, I will move to a unique deck to get that specific daily quest, but otherwise I completely ignore it. I really should stop playing Marvel Snap. I've got 3 or 4 different games on my phone, one of which is Yu-Gi-Oh! Though, so I'm not actually playing it Yu-Gi-Oh! On my phone. I'm just using it as a daily login. One of the things about CES is Roku has announced a new TV right about the time where I'm starting to think about maybe getting an Android TV instead. I don't know if there's a particularly great pick for an Android TV, but moving into that infrastructure I think would open up some more possibilities. Plus the TCL Roku TVs that I have now definitely seem like, particularly the Netflix app, just loves to crash, and I don't know if that is because of some weird networking setting I have, or if it is just straight up it just likes to crash. And there definitely is a case here where having the streaming service built in is nice, and it should just be by default. You should have some streaming service built into every TV, ignoring whether they're spying on you and trying to give you tracking ads, ignoring that argument completely. But to really take it up to the next step, you really do want more of a streaming, a stronger CPU, processor, and possibly better Wi-Fi connections or wired connections. But arguably what I should just do is get a Bluetooth, no, I mean a Blu-ray streaming device that plays Blu-ray, UK, 4K, ultra high definition discs, whatever the newest things there would be, and have streaming built into that, because at that point the CPU and GPU hopefully would be good enough, although there is still that risk that it wouldn't stay updated. Same is true for an Android TV though, but at least most Android TVs, I think you could probably root, you could probably put other apps into it. One of the things I'd like to do is rethink my security cameras into the point where they would pop up on the TV when they detect a person or motion. That's something that, even if Roku does enable that, they are only going to enable that for their own Roku streaming cameras, I think. And arguably it's probably a little too early to start experimenting that way. Let's start going through the video game news. I guess it is just by default always going to be the case that we repeat some news stories, and so I should stop mentioning it. Like, it's not super crazy for 24-hour news channels like MSNBC, CNN, Fox to repeat the same stories multiple times a day, particularly when they're trying to make sure people see those stories. I'm probably gonna lose here. Well, I guess I might as well activate the trap. This feels like this was one of those games where you never would have had a chance. Just put everything face down defense mode. Of course, I don't think these can go face down defense mode. Yeah, and I don't think there's anything likely to change there. So yeah, unless I could turn this around. From 200 health, I'm probably gonna lose. Wouldn't be surprised if that lets him summon something else. Yep. Ooh, interesting. Summon that and then immediately be able to attack with it to get that final death blow. Let's see, change decks. Let's just play Flowandres. I think we are here. Ooh, okay. Let's see. They've changed this deck again. So let's select this, and then let's edit this deck. This one can't have this many copies of that. Let's make a quick change. Really haven't seen anybody play Flowandres lately, so it very possibly is a case that this deck has just died. Anyways. Yeah. Well, we already talked about it though. Oreo's gonna start selling Xbox cookies later this month. I do believe there's some kind of giveaways around that. Although it is insane to buy extra sugar products or any products whatsoever in the hopes of winning. You would have to be in a situation where you're, I don't know, running a daycare center or something, and you could write off buying Oreos, or you're just buying a bunch of Oreos by default anyways. And then working towards potentially winning something there. Even at that, your odds of actually winning are just ridiculously low. So if you're going to do something like that, I'd highly recommend looking into wasting your time around the Publishers Clearinghouse line of giveaways, because at least in those cases you really don't have to spend any money and you're just wasting a bunch of time looking at a bunch of ads, or in my case having an ad blocker and potentially missing out on some entries. There's also some value potentially in the Publishers Clearinghouse giveaway that is $5,000 or $10,000 a week for the rest of your life, in that the amount of money that would really be, depending on your age, is high enough to be worth the incredibly low odds, if there is any argument towards that at all. I'm not sure that is actually a valid argument though. Like, if you have basically a 0% chance of winning and they're offering you an infinite amount of money, it doesn't matter, you still have a 0% chance of winning. Well, we got a victory there. What's funny there is he surrendered, but he was also about to go down a rank, so he put himself down a rank. We already talked about this too. Naughty Dog says revealing past games too early hurt the studio. This is potentially a conversation that is going to start being had more often, and it's probably a conversation a conversation that really should happen more often. Like, honestly, with the whole COVID pandemic stuff going on, it would have been the perfect time to make considerably less announcements and use the lockdown, pandemic, and work from home, all of those as just general excuses to say, hey, we're not going to announce games as early anymore, and we're going to not have to delay games as much because we're going to have actual final products before we release it. And very little, if nothing, happened like that. Arguably, there is probably some middle management in publishers' offices that only justify their jobs on a day-to-day basis by scheduling announcements and announcing games, and they don't want to lose their jobs, so they are unwilling to change the culture of announcing too early and then delaying or releasing bad quality products. And arguably, a lot of bad games would still be bad games regardless of how much time you give them. Duke Nukem Forever is probably a great example of that. I recently watched a YouTuber cover some of the early versions of Duke Nukem Forever before Gearbox stepped in and finished it, and it's just like, yeah, it's not a better game by any means in its early versions. It's not much of a game at all, considering they spent like 10 years working on it. Or allegedly spent 10 years working on it. I'm not sure they really were working on it. It's probably a little surprising that there aren't more cases where somebody claims they're working on their own first-party titles, but they run out of money, so they never actually work on it, and they're constantly doing side jobs instead. It would probably be nicer if that was the scam that somebody like the Yandere Simulator developer was doing, is that he was working side projects and making other games, or just working in a completely different industry, and that would be the reason as to why the Yandere Simulator is never getting to a point where I don't really want to do any of that. Yeah, the Yandere simulator really never gets to a point where he could just put it out and say he's done with it. Although arguably, he will never put it out in a way that he says he's done with it, because he's constantly adding new content and just pushing the grift, because he's probably got a Patreon that is getting monthly income, and I imagine a lot of people would stop funding the Patreon if you actually release the product. Normally, though, when you have grifters that have an idea of a video game, they can be converted. You can convert yourself from being a grifter to an actual game developer by simply saying, alright, I've got this Patreon that was supporting me for several years to make one game. Here's my announcement of my next game. And oh, by the way, here is the release of the first game. So now I have a proven track record that even if I'm slow, that I actually have a finished product. Of course, that ignores how much people are willing to overlook if you just slap an early access label on a game compared to saying it's actually a final product. Moving on, Video Games Chronicles says Frontier's share prices dived 40% following a disappointing F1 Manager 2022 sales. I don't know if this is news that really would have been reported on if this wasn't a UK based company. Remembering that remembering that Video Games Chronicles itself is a UK based company. And so they are particularly going the extra mile to talk about UK based companies. Looking at this being a simulation manager game, the screen looks alright, but more than likely you spend all of your time looking at this, and the image in the background here is just a wallpaper. But I don't think any manager games ever really are that good. There's a big difference in particular between a manager game where you're just moving a bunch of numbers around, which particularly in F1, I don't know how much managing actually happens anyways. As far as from the outside looking in, it seems like if you're on a Formula 1 team, you stay on that Formula 1 team for your life, and they don't like trade racers or do any kind of like strategy things, really. It doesn't in any way feel like, say, football, American football, where you're trading players fairly frequently, but you really only trade players even in American football at the beginning of the season. But you do pick who plays and who doesn't play, I guess, in American football. I think everybody races, if you can race in Formula 1. Of course, I'm particularly ignorant around what happens in Formula 1, and I don't think Formula 1 is particularly that popular compared to like American football, NFL. Add this. I really am just running out of room here. Yeah, once again, this is a great example of this hand and this deck taking too long, and too many Yu-Gi-Oh decks taking too long to actually play. We are really getting to the point too with these live streams where I really only want to stream and play Yu-Gi-Oh for an hour. Yeah, and I don't think that there's anywhere as many people that actually care about the video game news or looking at the games on Steam in particular, as I just need to do that for my own knowledge and for the YouTube Shorts now, which YouTube Shorts are working, so that in that shorter form factor, it's working. Okay. I'm gonna risk this. Take 300 damage, who cares? Do I need to reduce the attack on that character? No. You could do a board clear, and that would kind of hurt me, but not really. Let's see. I think they've confirmed at this point that the Xbox Showcase is actually going to happen. Xbox Developer Direct. Interestingly, calling it a Developer Direct might point to something more happening there, and it being maybe more around talking to developers than it is around talking to actual gamers. Destroy a card. Yeah, I think that puts me in a good position. But yeah, I guess what they're probably trying to do is just lock into the idea of a Nintendo Direct without just calling it an Xbox Direct. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it eventually devolves either to Xbox Directs or literally Developer Directs, and they get away from the Xbox title. It would be interesting. I need to stop using the word interesting or interestingly too. That's getting annoying to me. It wouldn't be super surprising though if they got rid of the Xbox branding. Even though it works pretty well in the West, it certainly has never worked in the East and in Japan. So perhaps you find just a completely different new title for a new series. They've gotten ridiculous with the titles and the names anyways. They should potentially just embrace what Nintendo has done and find something and call it something simple like a Switch or something like that. Or if they want to go really archaic and convoluted, why not just name it something like PC hardware is named? Regardless, it seems like they're going to be talking about Redfall, Forza Motorsport, and Minecraft Legends. It seems like Microsoft in particular has enough racing games to announce one every quarter, which is probably too many racing games. One of the things, as I'm looking at this like vampire lady that I was reminded of, one of the things that I think No More Heroes does deserve a lot more credit for is just how well balanced the male to female ratio is in No More Heroes 1. How many different female characters you are actually up against and actually fighting and actually like hurting compared to every other game. It's still pretty bad as it is in movies and video games where all the subordinate minions are male and frankly just copy and paste of the exact same 3D models, small handful 3D models. And it does go in kind of a weird direction in that everybody is drawn in that anime style in which they're pretty skinny, except for one female who is drawn in that anime style as a fat, obnoxious old lady, and you just don't see a lot of variety in between. But even that argument of saying, well, there's one character who's a visual gag as being a fat old lady, kind of falls apart in No More Heroes because there's kind of a there's kind of an ugly looking skinny lady that you fight right after the fat old lady. So like she has bags under her eyes and is just like a drunkard mess. Um, so there's that visual gag goes on further. Plus, there definitely are some fat ugly guys, at least a couple of them, uh, in No More Heroes. So it's fairly balanced for as old of a game as it would be. But I would say, definitely talking about No More Heroes, still, the game would have been better as an anime. Like, I would much prefer if there was some kind of mod that would just show you a perfect tool-assisted speedrun of No More Heroes and showed you the cutscenes, or if they just had made an anime around it. I'm hoping I can get to No More Heroes 2 and find it a lot better. I have heard it's a lot better. I also have never played No More Heroes 2, so that new content may revitalize me when I get around to it. Anyways, we're supposed to be talking about news. Apple is reportedly planning to launch an AR VR headset in the fall of 2023. That definitely could change things if it actually happens. But we've also, as far as the Apple rumors go, I don't talk about them because I don't care about Apple products. There's been Apple rumors around products for many years around many different things, and they often just never come about because I assume Apple is actually working on a lot of projects and they just don't release them all. One of the things that they have done with the key charging for Android phones is they've added a new standard to have magnets like the Apple charging has magnets around it. But noticeably, Apple products too have started using those magnets and as ways of having credit card cases attached to the back of your phone to get rid of wallets, which seems a little risky, certainly. Or they've had credit cases where you can put a credit card right over the magnetic charging. And so there is this fight amongst the idea of should this space be empty so you can always place it on a wireless charger, particularly in Apple's case where they don't want to use USB-C, and they may very well come out with devices that literally have no ports on them at all, and you are only able to charge it wirelessly. Or many actual users seem to think that this empty space should be used for holding credit cards. Apple is also slowly trying to work on a bloodless glucose meter into their Apple iWatch for like diabetics, and if that came out, you'd see a lot of people in the United States in particular who have diabetes getting Apple Watches, and they probably would own that market for a while. But as far as gaming, Apple has failed miserably as far as games. I don't think the M2 chip or the M1 chips are particularly good for gaming. So if they're going to put out VR and AR and then totally ignore gaming, it probably would fail. It probably would be way too expensive. And I'm not sure it would just work, or whether it would be just a expensive accessory. And there have been some expensive Apple accessory products in the past. The iPad, arguably at this point, is just an expensive accessory, and you don't need an iPad if you've got an iPhone. The desktop PCs at this point are arguably expensive accessories, and even the laptops are expensive accessories as far as Apple products because they're underpowered and they're not being really supported by enough software to justify using Apple products in those ways. I can excuse people being used to the iPhone and using iPhones. I really can't excuse people for using much of their other products. The iWatch, sure. The iBuds, sure. iPhone, sure. But anything else, those products have been kind of abandoned, and I wouldn't be surprised if AR and VR gets abandoned fairly quickly too. Moving on, Dead Space Remake. Steam pre-orders come with a free copy of Dead Space 2. which is weird because you would think that it would come with a free copy of Dead Space 1 instead, or both. It seems to me like this indicates that maybe Dead Space 1 as it is will be taken off of sale. So if anything, they've created this sense of urgency for people who don't own Dead Space 1 to potentially buy Dead Space 1 now without any delay, just to make sure you own that original version of the game so that you could play that original version of the game before the remake comes out. Like, almost certainly, though, people who own Dead Space 1 probably own Dead Space 2 on Steam. So that's not going to benefit a lot of people. Obviously, they're not going to give you a free copy of Dead Space 3 alone, because people would just not like Dead Space 3 and hate it there. So, this also signals that there isn't probably a lot of planning going on here to make a remake of Dead Space 2, and there isn't a lot of planning to change the story of what happens in Dead Space 2. And yeah, it's always felt like Dead Space 1's remake was announced simply to spit in the eye of the Callisto Protocol. The Callisto Protocol has now come out and flopped more than succeeded, and I frankly wouldn't have been surprised if they just straight up canceled the Dead Space 1 remake project after the Callisto Protocol flopped. But they've announced it, so I guess they're going to stick with it. But I don't think they're going to push it any further. And I don't know if I really believe that this, with a Dead Space 1 remake, that they're going to reboot this franchise and try to go further with it. Meanwhile, we can only hope that maybe the Callisto Protocol gets some patches, some tweaks, some mods to it or something to make it a better game, a more playable game, better narrative, and that the Callisto Protocol might continue as a spiritual successor to Dead Space. I don't know if anybody really cares to see it continue though. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says The Last of Us TV show first reviews are widely positive. I guess that's good news. I don't inherently want failure upon video game to TV or video game to movie translations. Although, in all fairness, it getting widely positive reviews doesn't really mean anything, because we have to remember The Last of Us TV show is set before the events of The Last of Us Part 1 video game, and easily could go in completely different directions and be completely a different game or a completely different show. So yeah, it is on HBO too, so potentially the people looking at it may have no idea about the video game, so it's also very possible that this is going to be one of those stories where critics like it, or people who are not in the know like it, and then game fans, people who have played The Last of Us, hate it, or comparing it to the video game and find it lackluster because of the comparison to the video game. Let's see, the Forza Horizon lead has left Xbox Playground Games to form a new AAA studio. The UK-based Maverick Games' first release will be an open-world title. It's crazy that people are still advertising open world as a feature. Even in the most recent GTA game, as someone who hasn't actually played them, I just don't feel like there's a lot to do in open worlds to justify so many games having open worlds. GTA is probably the exception there, where there is a decent amount of stuff you can do if you want to make your own fun. But noticeably, also, when you make an open world title, you never really get to copy and paste that environment or level design over to another game. GTA is a great example of that. Almost every single GTA is in a completely new city, and they can't ever or so far they have failed to be able to go back to any city and say this is the exact same city, but we've put new textures in it, or we've moved some buildings around and set it several years in the future. Well, ideally, if you are going to make an open world game, particularly in the case of No More Heroes, where they're making a fictional city called Santa Destroy, you would have thought you could have copy and pasted that same city layout and used it in multiple games and multiple series, and there could just be this video game city that is the standard city. One of the things that would have made No More Heroes a lot better of a game is if it was much more like Crackdown in its open world, in which there were just roaming enemies always shooting at you, and there was a lot of things to do, collection orbs to collect, things like that. Crackdown really revolutionized the idea of, here we're going to have an open world city and give you something to do in every square inch of the city, instead of just having roads that you can drive on that lead from point A to point B. Let's see. We'll see. Well, it'll take us a while, obviously, to hear what Maverick's first game is and if it's any good. Naughty Dog's Neil Druckmann wants to focus less on cutscenes and traditional narrative. The Last of Us creator says he's intrigued about games that don't hold the player's hand, which I don't know if those are exactly the same thing as far as a headline, and I don't really care about Neil Druckmann's opinion. This is a video interview with the Washington Post. Like, arguably, just arguing the headline, it's not a one-to-one connection that cutscenes or traditional narrative are holding the player's hand, in that all games really should probably have cutscenes, even if they are just in-engine cutscenes. Certain events have to happen if you're going to have writers actually direct the game. If you're going to have an open world game with no narrative whatsoever, like Fortnite, yes, the player can 100% run around at those points and do whatever he wants, but that's not going to tell a good story. It seems very much like he is trying to get away from telling narrative stories and trying to be lazy here and trying to make a game that has less narrative. Probably he's run out of ideas. Arguably Last of Us Part 2 even ran out of ideas. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is trying to position his company and position himself as, we're going to make a different kind of game that isn't going to be so narratively focused. I don't think anybody ever really complained about the narrative aspects, though, of Last of Us Part 1 or even Part 2. They complained about the quality or the direction of the narrative, but they didn't complain that there was narrative aspects. 1 second, I'm gonna stand up for a second, stretch my legs. That loud banging sound was my Xbox controller being knocked over into the floor, actually probably hitting the weights I have on my microphone stand. Sorry. It's just chairs getting uncomfortable prematurely here. The new cushion I've gotten is firmer, but it also, because it's firmer, doesn't really last that long. At some point I may literally just get like a medical device that re-inflates the cushion in my chair, and you'll just hear this loud pump sound. Eventually I am going to break my controller, knocking it over almost certainly. I did drop my cell phone like a couple days ago, and I thought I was going to break that, but I got lucky. Thank goodness I have a case around it. yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this. The only thing you really could take from this is that Naughty Dog is probably trying to make a game that is going to be less narrative based. But I would say when you say the phrase games that don't hold the player's hand, I'm thinking something like Dark Souls, Elden Ring, something that is just going to be very difficult and you're going to have to die. Honestly, I don't feel like that's good game development in modern day. No More Heroes, as I'm playing it and dying over and over again, and it's just giving me a selection of 4 or 5 text tips on the continue screen. It's just not helping me well enough. I would very much prefer for the game to take pity on me and have me do twice as much damage in the next attempt, or give me twice as much health. Do it secretly so it's not obvious, obviously, but I definitely would love for the game to hold my hand and just let me win after the 5th or 6th attempt on a boss fight. But yeah, I do want games, as an older gamer, as somebody who doesn't want to actually struggle, as somebody who has a bunch of games to play and get through, I do want games to hold my hand. And arguably even like Nintendo games, Kirby and the Forgotten World, which I've given up on trying to get that last 5% on that, so I'm done with Kirby. I would have liked it to hold my hand a little bit more in the boss fights, or not give me take 0 damage challenges. But in general in Kirby, I think in Nintendo games is that they've gotten grindy more than even particularly difficult in the last 5%. They've just gotten ridiculous in that Mario Odyssey had too many heart stars that you could potentially collect for not any real reward. Kirby and Forgotten Land has too many boss fights at the end that there's really just not a reason to get it other than you're obsessed with getting the 100% mark of completion. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Meta is ending support for the original Quest headset. The company is no longer shipping new features and is cutting access to social ones. This is the beginning of the end, certainly, as far as VR. For as expensive as these headsets were, I'm not sure if they're going to actually list the price here. Like, these devices should have lasted for 5 to 10 years. Here we are getting the original Quest coming out in May of 2019, and yeah, barely 5 years at that. You can get the Quest 2 for $100, so the price is not terrible, but why in the world would you support that? Why would you support Meta when they potentially are going to drop support for the Quest 2 in 5 years? Like, whereas in comparison, older consoles, you could easily still have an NES from like 83 or 87 and it still could potentially work today. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some attempts to hack the Quest, but I don't know how much you can even hack into it. The other big problem, certainly as far as VR, is that in the entire lifetime of the Quest 1, there really aren't that many games to play. Like Resident Evil 4 might be one of the best games. There is a price comparison certainly to consider, though, as far as people buying a Quest 2 for $100 compared to the PlayStation VR 2 coming out for $550, which is way too expensive. Moving on, Hogwarts Legacy is Steam's top-selling premium game a month ahead of its release. The Warner title looks on course for a big launch next month. So yeah, any thought of a boycott, even before its release, has been crushed. My concern still very much is just, is there enough gameplay in there to make sense? And I'm not really sure if this is like a single player narrative experience that you're going to have in Hogwarts Legacy, or if it isn't more of an MMO online game, or just a game that's just going to try and constantly add more elements to it. What happens also when you have a situation where something big like a Harry Potter tie-in game comes out is that it pushes the list of other tie-in games that I never got around to playing down in my mind. So I have like 2 or 3 Game of Thrones games that I purchased thinking I could possibly make content in around the Game of Thrones hype, and yeah, I totally did not get that done quick enough that I would have gained any extra viewership for it. So, and having learned from that lesson, I definitely would not buy Hogwarts Legacy unless I was just going to buy it right now, or if somebody was going to gift it to me right now, so I could play it day one. And even if I was going to play it like day one, I would have to try some kind of experimental live streaming while pre-recording footage, which I don't know if that would really work. Plus, it would poison the well a bit, as far as I'm right now seemingly getting more subscribers due to the YouTube Shorts, so I should probably just focus on doing YouTube Shorts and milking that for all it's worth. It does potentially seem like this guy is a little bit older of a character, so maybe you play as like last year students at Hogwarts and then you move out of Hogwarts, or maybe you even play as like alumni or teachers at Hogwarts. But yeah, I think the Harry Potter concept should probably, for video games, start at Hogwarts and then expand to a much bigger open world. Like, riding this flying mount definitely screams more around Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them than the Harry Potter series. Yeah, it looks like it's an action hack and slash type game with magic spells in the actual gameplay, and this is really what I wanted to see when they were putting out like the first couple of teaser trailers of the game, is just what are you actually doing in the Harry Potter world. So obviously there's some dungeon crawling of some sort, so effectively it feels a lot like it's a JRPG game, just taking the Japanese part out and instead making a Western type game. Yeah, that looks interesting enough. Like, I'm not gonna, there's nothing amazing there. Certainly this gameplay though is showing, looks a lot different than this screenshot. So the game itself has shifted in its appearance. Moving on, I need to hurry up. New PlayStation 5 console bundles have been listed by retailer. They appear to be offering a PS5 with 2 DualSense controllers, which I guess the question really to ask there would be, how many PlayStation 5 exclusives are there that require 2 controllers, that you wouldn't just sell a second controller separate? I guess that is an interesting thought. I don't know if I can really name a game that has co-op. Co-op hasn't really been pushed too much by yeah, I don't feel like co-op has been particularly pushed by PlayStation. This is a weird one. EA will remove Madden NFL's 23's CPR celebration after Damar Hamlin's collapse. Buffalo Bills players currently recovering in the hospital following an on-field incident. Let's see. So this is probably more complicated than it sounds. Why does somebody have a CPR like dance in the first place, and why does Madden have dances and celebrations anyways in the game? I can see why players would want that, but I would have thought NFL would say, hey, we don't want these delay of game type things. Let's see. So Damar Hammer suffered a cardiac arrest after making a tackle. And what is the CPR dance and who does it? In Madden 23, players can lay down on the ground after scoring a touchdown while their teammates simulate delivering CPR. This shows just how stupid EA is. That they thought that wasn't going to happen. Like that seems so dumb that you would have like ever allowed that as a celebration in the first place, because obviously somebody was going to get hurt and require CPR eventually. It's an overreaction. EA really should just stick to their guns and say, no, we're going to leave it in. We were dumb enough to put it in the first place. Let's just double down on our stupidity for an argument of free speech and free expression. I guess it shows maybe some pretense of being more mature by removing it, yes, but I doubt anybody is going to give EA that level of credit. But generally, I'm more offended here, and I would think the NFL is more offended that they have these celebration events in the first place. And that, because almost certainly if you did that on the field, it would get called for a delay of game or something like that. Arguably, if it wasn't a CPR animation, if it was literally just you could punch players in Madden NFL, and or you could just low blow them or something, kick them in the balls or something, like, yes, that would be fine if you weren't making a Madden game. But since Madden is kind of synonymous with reproducing what NFL wants in football to be, you wouldn't add those elements in the first place. I guess at a certain level, though, maybe EA is just desperate to add any new content that anybody likes in Madden to sell you yet another copy of the previous version of the game that's just been slightly tweaked. Speaking of slightly tweaked, Bayonetta 3's latest update makes some stages easier and tweaks Viola's combat. The version 1.2 patch 0.0 makes it easier to unlock the special old book picture level. Also, yep. Is Bayonetta 3 on PC? I guess is a question I would really want to ask you. Yeah, I definitely am at a point where I'd only play Bayonetta 3 on PC if it comes out on PC, and I will obviously only play whatever version is released on PC. So yeah, more and more those early adopters, those people that play games day one, they get a worse experience by far. Maybe the better players, the hardcore players, should play games day one, and then the late to the party players who buy a game outside of the window get an easier experience. But that definitely is what I'm looking for, is an easier experience. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge is now on mobile, exclusive to Netflix members. The streaming service is the only way to access the game on iOS and Android. That's an interesting experiment, certainly. I've never played any of the games via Netflix on my phone, and I don't think I would particularly break the streak just to play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. I do think it is on Steam anyways, so I would just buy it there. It's still very much a case where I just need every game on my Steam library, or I'm not going to consider it a game that I even own. A new single-player mech warrior game is in development, according to Video Games Chronicles. Okay, that could be interesting, or it could just be not interesting. It heavily comes down to whether there's enough of an audience out there that play mech warrior games to convince me, as somebody who doesn't play a mech warrior game, that I should play a mech warrior game. And that's going to be a tall order. Now, arguably, I believe Mech Warrior is one of these tabletop games that isn't particularly connected to Dungeons and Dragons in any way. So, in the middle of the Dungeons and Dragons new debacle, and just Dungeons and Dragons in general sucking, and Magic the Gathering being based on Dungeons and Dragons generally sucking, and Hasbro as the parent company generally sucking, maybe there would be a fairly large shift from people playing Dungeons and Dragons to Mech Warrior, but that's a pretty big shift going from fantasy to sci-fi. And I don't know if it wouldn't be more people moving to Warhammer, which I don't think Warhammer has anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons. The main thing is that Dungeons and Dragons almost certainly is going to start trying to sue people and saying that doing natural rules like rolling a 20-sided dice, or having attack or health points or things like that, they're going to start trying to claim some of those very generic concepts as part of Dungeons and Dragons copyrighted content, and they'll almost certainly fail at that, but they could spend a long time certainly suing people and delaying the production of new products if they are suing people. I should also mention, and I don't know if this really is video game news at all, but to clean up a more clickbaity video from the quartering, I'll say it seems like Adam Sessler claims to now be semi-retired and just hate gamers. I don't know if he ever really liked gamers, but yeah. I would say in particular, it felt like Adam Sessler and Kevin Pereira did very little, practically nothing for the G4 reboot. As far as I just don't think they were doing a lot of visible work. They may have been doing a ton of stuff in the background. I wouldn't know. But they certainly didn't bring any real celebrity to the G4 reboot or help save it, although I don't think anything particularly would have helped save it. Honestly, if Adam Sessler didn't care about video games and he could be the semi-retired, which semi-retired just means that you don't have enough money to be fully retired and that you're just floating around looking for another career path, he at that point should have just not come back to video games. And he's had multiple opportunities to not come back to video games and chosen the exact opposite of doing that. So I wouldn't be surprised if he once again tries to show up as a video game in the video game sphere, when there's really no reason for him to come back. He was a good presenter standing in front of a screen on XPlay, reading reviews that either he was writing or somebody else was writing, but that was many years ago. There's really not a reason to bring him back. I don't know if he's even particularly insightful as a game player. The thing I never saw from Adam Sessler, and this is something that could be lobbied to a lot of mainstream video game critics, is you just don't see them play video games at all. They write reviews around the one game they have to write a review around, but they don't play anything else. They don't seem to have much, if any, passion around playing other video games. That's one of the things that I think is good about my channel, even if my channel's pre-recorded footage kind of is long. It is super long. Let's get rid of the kinda. Is that at least you see me playing games and you see my level of enjoyment with games, which often is not even that high. I'm often very frustrated with games. but I am actually playing the games, whereas a lot of mainstream video game critics, once they leave being in that position where they have to actually play games to review games, they don't seem to stick with much of anything. They'll play like Wordle, and that's it. So yeah, I'm not sure there was ever really a passion there. But yeah, I guess in general, the message that Adam Sessler is trying to put out is that he just doesn't want to interact with video game people anymore, and he put some kind of insulting title, changing his name on Twitter or something, just kind of being childish and trolly, when he could have just gone private anyways, although maybe he's too much of a public person to do that, and maybe he's not successful enough to have an assistant look at his Twitter instead of him. But yeah, I don't think he wants to deal with gamers. Fair enough. In contrast, Morgan Webb probably didn't want to deal with gamers either, and that's why Morgan Webb stayed with the job she got, I think, right out of X-Play. I think she's still with that job. She may have started that company and been an investor in that company, but she's just stayed with that, and she stayed silent, and she's not tried to come back and get any kind of celebrity. And I bet she's happier for it. Moving on, Xbox and Bethesda has the developer direct being confirmed. It's not much as far as a poster here. It's a picture here. It seems like somebody literally just hand drew this with ink, and maybe that's the style they're going for. Noticeably, there's a lot of white space here where other games potentially could have been announced. I see at least enough room for 4 other games to have been talked about or announced. And those have been removed. When you see that kind of picture, though, I wonder if yeah, this is kind of polished, so they put some effort into it, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was something that was going to be bigger or something that was going to happen later, and they got pushed to releasing it, or they rushed to releasing it. I wouldn't be surprised if there is four plus games that were supposed to be announced at this developer direct that got delayed. I wouldn't be surprised if these directs happen basically a month after there is a board meeting and they decide whether to delay a game or not delay a game, or cancel games and not cancel games, just as a direct response to whatever decisions were made in that secret board meeting. That's when you have these kind of direct events. But obviously, there is an element there too where they are trying to just copy Nintendo and trying to get their own news press. The fact that Xbox is potentially having a developer direct and experimenting on that does imply that they might be less likely in the future to announce games during the Game Awards or during E3, which probably would work fairly well for them. That E3 doesn't have anything new to announce at the moment, and I doubt E3 this year will be that big. Moving on, Hogwarts Legacy voice talent has been revealed, including Simon Pegg and Sebastian Croft and Amelia Gething as playable avatars. Which, okay. I don't know what playable avatars mean, that you could play as them. That does imply that the game is maybe more of a single player experience than I think, and you might jump from one character to another character, or you might be able to do a spell to turn into those characters. This sounds like this is a cast of mostly British actors doing voice acting, and these are famous actors, not video game voice actors. So, you, Simon Pegg seems to be playing as Headmaster Black, which means this is set in a different time frame. And then Leslie Nicole is from Downton Abbey. Candace Cain is from the Human Centipede 2, which isn't even one of the good Human Centipede movies of the Human Centipede movies, which only the first one I would say is good if you're even going to go that far and say it's good, which is a big stretch. If I recall correctly, the Human Centipede 2 basically has nothing to do with the events of the first movie and is in no way as good. Let's see. Luke Youngblood and Asif Ali are not credited as doing anything else. I don't know if Avalanche Software being credited for Disney Infinity does them a great service, but whatever. I don't think there really was anything wrong with Disney Infinity. It was just Disney didn't support it. It is still that same thing though, where you have like Simon Pegg being stunt hired as a voice actor, when I don't know if I really believe Simon Pegg is a good video game voice actor, and they're not really doing a face scan on him. Arguably, maybe you could make the argument Simon Pegg is old and really should have never been an actor in the first place. He was casting himself in his own movies more than anything. So maybe there is an argument that older actors should get more voice acting work, but that argument falls apart when you think about the seniority and the idea of a union shop of voice actors who had been working as voice actors alone for their entire career. Let's see. January's PlayStation Plus game catalog and classics have been announced. It includes Back 4 Blood, Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition, Siphon Filter, and Hot Shots Golf Part 2. This screenshot, I assume, is from Back 4 Blood. That would be my guess. As an odd pick, certainly, of what you would pick from a screenshot. And arguably, I would say Dragon Ball Fighter Z is probably more relevant than Back 4 Blood is, because Back 4 Blood wasn't really that good. DMC 5 Special Edition is probably even more relevant than that. Even Just Cause 4 is more relevant, I think, than Back 4 Blood. So that's an odd pick, in my opinion, as far as Video Game Chronicles picking that for their thumbnail. I don't think they put a lot of effort into picking these thumbnails. They just search the first one, and these were probably somewhat in alphabetical order, although Hot Shots should be higher up than Siphon Filter 3. But yeah, they probably just searched the first thing, and the first thing that came up. I wouldn't be surprised if an intern picks these thumbnails a lot of times. Apparently, Ubisoft has canceled 3 unannounced games and delayed Skull and Bones. Again, the company says it's facing major challenges as the industry continues to shift towards mega brands. I think Ubisoft is definitely having its own unique problems, and arguably Ubisoft may be trying to devalue itself and can't, well, maybe not even devalue itself as much as just clean house and cancel projects before it sells itself, because there has been some rumors and some feeling out there that Ubisoft is, after spending years avoiding being acquired by Vivendi, they are now open to being taken over and selling themselves to other companies. I think it's a Middle Eastern country in particular that might be interested in taking over Ubisoft. They very possibly are buying themselves time until the Microsoft Activision Blizzard merger happens, to use that as an example, to then sell themselves, or quote unquote merge with some other company. I do think Yves Guillemot in particular is fairly tired and old at this point and would like to jump ship or retire. And I think a lot of the talent and skill has already potentially set up plans or already moved over to his kid's new company. Moving on, Nintendo has dominated Japanese sales for its 18th year in a row. 2004 was the last year the company didn't have the majority of the top 10 selling games. So, yeah, there's been an entire childhood's worth of time in which Japanese people have been mostly buying Nintendo games. And a lot of times people were also buying PlayStations, certainly as their second console, or buying a PlayStation and playing only one game on a PlayStation. But when it comes down to the gamers who want to play a lot of games in Japan, it has been Nintendo, and it really couldn't have been anything other than Nintendo, because there's no Xbox competition there, and only until very recently, maybe in the past 2 or 3 years, has PC even considered to be an option. I'm not sure that these hardware charts even would count PC sales at all. So very possibly PC is a lot more popular in Japan than is actually shown. Let's see. I guess the only other thing I would want to show here is that this image seems weird. He has like this drool on his face as far as Wario. And then is it supposed to be a candy bar? I kind of wonder, are these supposed to be cigarettes? I kind of wonder if they didn't find an image online of somebody who had like changed this so that there is a Wario version of this without the drool. I guess these are coins, not cigarettes. And I guess this is candy, even though there's like not a single other candy anywhere here. But yeah, this Wario image, I guess, is just a reference that Nintendo is greedy, and Nintendo has succeeded greatly at being greedy. 18 years of straight success in Japan has definitely led to Nintendo being lazy too. It has to be pointed out. And there's no real end in sight for that laziness unless somebody else gets put in charge of Nintendo, which is possible but not super likely. Even if somebody was newly in charge of Nintendo, which relatively somebody is newly in charge of Nintendo, they have this Japanese respect thing where they won't change things out of respect of the way the previous person in charge did it. So yeah, Nintendo highly unlikely to change unless it was forced into change, and I don't see there would be much of a reason. It's more likely, frankly, that Japan in general will just have to change and bring in a whole bunch of immigrants, which they absolutely would not do, to the point where you would have a new Japan with new immigrant people running businesses and running the country. As the Native American, or I guess in this case, Native Japanese citizen and population became more like Native Americans in the United States, where they are fewer and fewer and less influential, which that's a mean way to say that, but it's very possible. And I don't know who this new population of immigrants really would be. It could be kind of anybody. And certainly, if somebody took over the land of Japan, they probably wouldn't take over the culture of Japan particularly well. Japan's best bet would be to import as many obsessed otaku Japanophiles as they could possibly find, a bunch of just like white people from Europe and like the United States and the West, and try to breed with them to make at least half Japanese, half otaku children. I'm rambling at this point. Ubisoft says it has been surprised by the Mario and Rabbids sequel underperformance. I'm not particularly surprised by that. They put out too many of these games too fast. It was an interesting idea when they made Mario and Rabbids 1, and then it feels like they've released either DLC or side games around the Mario and Rabbids concept fairly too quick after the first game, and then it feels like they moved fairly too quick as far as the sequel. The idea of XCOM but on Nintendo works well enough for XCOM fans, but I just don't think there are that many XCOM fans. And at this point, Ubisoft really is just pulling a Square Enix in that they're publicly saying that their disappointment around the sales, when really they should just be silent about that and say nothing. It seems like a lot of these shareholders meetings or press conferences or announcements are being too public and saying things too outwardly, when in previous years people would have more tact and just stay silent, and just, if you don't have anything nice to say nothing at all. Doesn't seem to be the way to run a business anymore in Ubisoft's minds. Bigger brands in particular, publisher believes the economic environment has pushed players to bigger brands, is a ridiculous argument, because it's making an excuse for Ubisoft to say, well, the only big brands we have are Assassin's Creed, so we're just going to make more Assassin's Creed games and nothing else. Ubisoft has nothing else that would be really a bigger brand. But Mario and Rabbids, Mario is the biggest brand out there. Rabbids is not a particularly huge brand, but it's a big enough brand when added with Mario. Like, there's no bigger crossover event Rabbids and any Ubisoft product could possibly have had other than Mario. And pretty much any other developer or publisher would kill to have a crossover with Mario in it. Let's see. Microsoft says a new Xbox update makes it the first carbon-aware console. The company is rolling out a number of energy-saving features. That is something that hasn't been touched as far as smart homes and like smart devices in general, is that with the Matter standard, there probably should be a mandatory power monitoring reporting feature in a lot of products. I know some of the Tuya smart plugs I have can power monitor, but some of the smart plugs I have can't. But the next step is, when you have anything that's powerful as an Xbox, it really should be, at least in its own system, if not in a interconnected standard, reporting how much power it is using individually. And arguably, this is where a law from the European Union might come into great effect, to say the industry must add to the Matter standard, which is whatever the smart home standard that's likely to succeed, although I am seeing some problems with it in its first releases, but into that Matter standard, into the thread interconnected standard, all devices that can power monitor must power monitor and report back. I could see the European Union passing that, and I could see eventually it coming down to people straight up saying, we're going to class different devices, and in rolling blackout times, we are going to send signals to these specific devices to safely shut down. Which I could see that happening, and that's something the freedom of the United States would really hate, but it wouldn't be a terrible thought. Like, if you have class 1 devices like oxygen machines for people who would literally die on an oxygen machine, and it has to report back its power usage, but it is exempt from ever being shut down, that would be great. And then if you have class 2 devices that are potentially information machines like TVs and cell phones, communication devices like that. You probably would even want to break it down and say cell phones, yes, are class 2, TVs class 3, PCs maybe class 4, and then like lower devices like refrigerators could be like class 5, where during a rolling blackout you could shut down a refrigerator or an air conditioner or a heater. But yeah, if every smart device that knew how much power it was using could be individually selected to shut down the strain on the grid, that'd be very useful. Now, arguably, the strains on power grids in some places are 100% fabricated by just poor management by the government, or such as the Texas power grid, or the strains on the grid happen because of global warming, in which entire east coast or west coast of the United States gets shut down in blizzards and snowstorms, and there's just no hope of adjusting for that. But yeah, I went on a side note there, and I heavily suspect that this Xbox update is really putting out the idea that it is actually going to monitor its power or monitor the amount of carbon footprint it's putting out based on the amount of energy it's using. But yeah, I imagine this is mostly just going to be a useless feature that they're going to advertise based on, and nowhere as cool as the idea of having all future devices power aware and potentially receiving signals to shut down. Like, computers have wake on LAN, and potentially you could have an app on a computer even now that would tell it to shut down if it got a signal via the internet. Of course, the other danger there is hacking. If everything is reporting to a device that something could be hacked and everything could be shut down. So you would probably want to create a device, create some kind of cooldown feature where anytime a device got a signal to shut down, it would pop up like a 10-second countdown that said, I'm about to shut down, do you want to cancel? If you cancel, it will ignore shutdown signals for 24 hours or so, and if you turn it back on, it will not shut down again if you get that same signal multiple times. But like, as a concept, it's not a terrible thought. And you definitely don't want it to become a case where the government has the ability to just shut down all devices inside of a house as they're attempting to SWAT somebody. They could already cut the power if they were going to do that, but they can't just like harass people they don't like. Governments totally would do that, where they would shut down all devices and potentially try and freeze people to death in the winter just because they don't like them. Yeah, I'm totally rambling at this point. And we haven't gotten... This is our last article from Video Games Chronicles. Children of Silent Town is an endearingly moody Tim Burton inspired adventure. This is a bookmarked article, although oddly is the last article, so we're going to probably see this article multiple times. Interesting. It does feel Tim Burton-esque. It's definitely a different art style. I'm not sure I 100% like the idea of these like big red spots around their eyes, because it kind of comes out like they've just all been either in the dark their entire life, or they've all just been punched or have rashes on their face, which is weird. In a funny way, this isn't too different from the Moe art style, even though you would not call this the Moe art style, but you really have no limbs, no fingers being drawn. The legs and shoulders and chest are all much shorter than what an actual human would look like, where the head is much bigger, the eyes are bigger, but not quite as big as you might see in an in a moe animation. The hairstyles are very natural in the color palette tones, which that would definitely change the effect quite a bit too. Let's see. It's coming out January 11th, so it's just around the corner. I don't know if we really need to watch what the actual game is. I'm not 100% sure what the actual game is. This trailer is mostly not showing much of anything. If I was to guess, it looks like it is pretty much just a point and click adventure game. Seems like there might be some puzzles here, and that may be pretty much it. It doesn't feel too off from like the Psychonauts experience too. They announced that they were going to do a Wednesday Addams season 2 as far as Tim Burton is connected. He's not really connected to this game, but as far as he's concerned. But noticeably, there are definitely some Tim Burton-esque movies I've never gotten around to watch. I've always wanted to watch Coraline. I may even have it on Blu-ray and never got around to watching it. We're now at the Gematsu articles for Spoken Cinematic Trailer. We had already seen that. King of Fighters 15 Season 2 DLC characters launched January 17th. They've added a couple new characters. King of Fighters animation styles seem all over the place. They feel kind of half CG, half flat 2D. Definitely this color palette does not match with this color palette, or even really too much with that color palette, but I'll leave it at that since I'm not probably going to play a King of Fighters game. Disgaea 7 has yet another trailer. I feel like I saw 2 or 3 Disgaea 7 trailers come out as announcements in the past day. We already talked about Maverick Games being announced. Former Playground Games staff established Maverick Games. They're developing a premium open world game for consoles and PC. We'll definitely have to see more of that. If I was better at following people's careers and had some kind of like database of following people and their careers, I would get all of these names and add it to the database and perhaps look at their history. You could probably Wikipedia most of these people and get their history. Mostly it says these are just people who worked at Playground Games, with an exception of one person from EA, one person from Sumo Digital, and one person who doesn't seem to be credited as being former anything. None of these names really jump out, and that is a problem. We should be able to recognize people who actually work in the game industry. But in all fairness, most people who watch movies and TV don't recognize people working in the movie or TV industry either. Backfire launches January 30th for basically everything. Backfire Wall. Astrolab Games is going to publish a retro sci-fi visual novel adventure games called Story from Soul the Gun Dog for PC. This definitely looks retro, but I think it actually is a brand new game. This color palette is rough. I get the idea of going for military, but this is kind of a great example of where anime started off trying to be kind of realistic in their mech military things by having people have the exact same color outfits and fairly realistic hairstyles, and why anime very relatively quickly started shifting away from that, because you just can't have 3 characters with red hair in the same anime because they just don't stand out visually enough. And that's when you started to get the different hairstyles, different hair colors, particularly in the outfits here. They're really struggling to stick on a 2-color green, 2-tone green, 3-tone green color palette, while still trying to have different ways in which people wear their outfits and look different. But yeah, it really just does not work very well. And what they wouldn't have wanted to do is add a bunch of medals on the chest or logos on the outfits, because that would have been hard to animate. I'm not sure that there's a ton of actual fandom for retro art styles that much anyways. I know there will be some of that. Certainly people who are fans of the original Gundam series will look at that and say that looks cool, but when you actually look at the game here, it's a super simplistic point and click adventure type game, or adventure type game, and the animation of the characters in the actual screenshots are nowhere close to what the cover art is, so it feels pretty bait and switchy. A game called Avatar Generations launches in early 2023. It has a gameplay trailer. It's a smartphone game. Avatar has managed to succeed in a lot more than I would have thought it would have after the series had been ended. Looking at this seems like this is all the characters from the original Avatar game in about their age time from the original Avatar cartoon, not game. So calling it Generations seems a little weird, because you would expect you would see that second series that was a continuation of Avatar generations later, or one generation later, when they were older. And that second series didn't lead to a third series, which Avatar was very successful enough that really, had it been handed to maybe somebody else besides Nickelodeon, it would have gotten more funding, and in that more funding there could have been expanded bigger teams to make more Avatar type content. Almost certainly part of the reason why Avatar The Last Airbender would enjoy any success is that they finally got that new Avatar movie out. So yeah, now I guess the wait begins for the next Avatar movie from James Cameron, I think. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything here that that this would imply you would have the sequel, Legend of Korra stuff. Yeah, that's the name of the sequel. It says it follows closely the iconic plot points of the television series, following the main characters. New content will be added regularly, which follow the journeys of the other avatars, including the legend of Korra. And the general idea of Avatar The Last Airbender, I guess, does open the idea that there could be other avatars that would pop up in previous or future generations. Let's see. As far as other kids' games, SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake, Meet the Bikini Bottomies trailer is available if you want to check that out. I assume this is a new game and not a remake like the previous SpongeBob SquarePants games. It's coming out January 31st. I'm not sure kids are particularly that interested in SpongeBob SquarePants. I'm not sure it airs on Nickelodeon. I'm not sure kids watch Nickelodeon at this point. So it's very possible that a new game in this series really is just targeting older adults more than anything else. Ys 9 Monster Nox for PS5 launches May 9th in North America and May 12th in Europe. I guess I'll leave it at that. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot teases a 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc as Season Pass 2 DLC, which, what does that mean? I don't know. I would have to assume that the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai is a reference to some section of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot or Dragon Ball Z or even Dragon Ball. This honestly looks like this is a screenshot of Dragon Ball, not even Dragon Ball Z. And then Bardock as a character. He's not a character I'm even particularly familiar with, but I think he shows up much later in the series than Dragon Ball, unless there's a time manipulation element to it, which very possibly there is a time manipulation element to it. But visually, there's very little connection to this animation style and this animation style, which highlights just how long Dragon Ball Z has been around and how much it's evolved. Tales of Symphonia Remastered has a gameplay trailer, if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. New Dragon Quest RPG for iOS and Android will be announced on January 18th. The side-scrolling beat-em-up game SD Shin Kamen Rider Ranbo has been announced for Switch and PC. They don't have any pictures or trailers for it. It's due out March 23rd in Japan. One of those Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy The Black Soldier, is shut down as of today, and they are trying to end it, I guess, on a good note, but I feel like that game probably was only running as a online MMO for a couple of years, and I don't know if there's anybody that's going to be happy it's shut down, really. Famitsu review scores for issue 1780. They give Dragonoka 32 out of 40 for Switch, Never Awake 34 out of 40 for PlayStations and Switch. That's kind of a high score. Tristia Legacy for Switch 28 and Tristia Restore for Switch 27 out of 40. Not a lot of games being reviewed today, particularly games that I recognize. I don't recognize any of those games, so I'd have to assume this is Dragonoka, but this could be Never Awake or Tristia, one of the Tristias, and I couldn't tell you what this actually is based on that screenshot. I'm not sure I've seen anything about any of those games. This guy has yet another trailer if you want to check it out. Let's see, Mercenaries Lament Silver Wolf and the 7 Stars of the Maiden has been announced for the PS4 and Switch. I assume this is a JRPG game. Kind of looks like it might have a slightly different art style, but it is one of those positional placement strategy games that I just cannot bother to ever play, turn-based RPGs. Disgaea 7's demo launches January 12th in Japan. It's like Disgaea made multiple announcements all at the same time. It's like, here's 3 different trailers and a demo all being announced. I did see this like news reporter screenshot, and yeah, this is striking. That you would have just like giant anime belt around your wrist, and then giant anime double belt around your chest as a bra, giant anime belt around your head. Just really going with a ridiculous theme. It does make an interesting point around clothing, certainly, that clothing cannot exist if the material does not exist to actually make it. For instance, if culture wanted to evolve that you always covered up your nose, we would have to have some kind of fabric or something, some kind of glue that you could cover up your nose, and particularly if it was cover up your nose and only your nose. In the same way, if the concepts and developments of a bra or a shirt didn't exist, the only kinds of bras that you could make, particularly in a world that doesn't have advanced sewing techniques, would be some kind of leather belt type element. That definitely wouldn't work very well, though. Like, you would have to have a kind of underwire bra belt that is tighter than the higher nipple covering belt, and it would have to be particularly tight and not leather belts probably aren't that elastic, so it would be incredibly uncomfortable, very possibly make it difficult to impossible to breathe in. There would almost certainly have to be incredibly tight to stop breasts from just bouncing up and out of that bra. And if anything is arguably too uncomfortable, eventually society will end up getting rid of that. Although there definitely have been times in which bodices and corsets have been all the fashion and have existed while literally deforming the bodies of women who wear them. But eventually, yes, we did get away from bodices and corsets. But yeah, that is very much a kind of ridiculous anime. Let's have some cheesecake. Let's do some lewd outfits. And you can see the other characters here. Definitely not as underdressed as that. Although, in all fairness, our main protagonist, Beefcake Devil character here, is totally topless. So, I guess some turnabout is fair play there. And she's apparently a spear character in this screenshot. And that definitely caught my attention more than most of the things around Disgaea 7. And I still don't want to play Disgaea games, but it caught my attention. Hogwarts Legacy voice cast, we already talked about, so I don't think we need to cover it again. Developer Direct, we already talked about. And then that moves us to new games that came out on Steam, so let's see if we can burn through this fairly quickly. Here we have it's an adult game. Well, I wasn't expecting that. You just roll into some of these screenshots and particularly if they make the first 5 screenshots not adult looking, it's not super it's not likely that I'd make that assumption. Arguably this is a problem with the way Steam puts the adult content warning. It really should be at the very top, or it should be just right across the screen. Arguably a completely different background would make some sense too. Now what's weird about this is that some of these screenshots are censored, but one of these screenshots is not censored, so you totally are seeing the nipples of a female presenting character. It seems like that's the case. Maybe that's not really the case. And then sometimes these screenshots are really small, as far as there are these little smiley faces over it, so it's not really hiding as much as a black bar probably should, or a blur should. This game is Exori, Exiori. It definitely looks like it's not quite the best quality RPG game, but as far as adult games, it actually looks fairly high quality. That being said, it is $17.99. It says it has English full audio. They're calling it a Japanese RPG, but it doesn't have any Japanese language support, which I would argue shouldn't be called a Japanese RPG in that case. But yeah, if you potentially wanted to play what might be an average RPG type game like this, and you wanted to have some adult content in it, Exori is definitely one to think about. And I'm going to put it on the follow list just to see what the actual player feedback is. Now today is Wednesday, so I guess we are just back around, and honestly it's getting down to the point where there are more days out of the week in which adult games are actually getting released than there are days out of the week in which they aren't getting released. There seems to be some bundling certainly happening, so it doesn't happen quite on Sundays, quite on Mondays, but by the time you get to Wednesdays, we are seeing adult games getting released. And then Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays, we're definitely seeing adult games getting released. And the next game is also an adult game called Darkness Revenge. This time it's a 3D CGI visual novel type game. I think in this case it's a vampire lady, which tells a slightly different story. You choose between a male or female vampire character. Take your revenge as you kill on your killers as a vampire. It all still comes off very much like an asset flip, in part using just the same old 3D CGI characters and maybe just changing the teeth model to add the vampire stuff in it. It doesn't look terrible though. I do think you get in a lot of these adult game visual novels what you're generally expecting. It is oddly early access. It's $9.99 and it's English only. But what you're expecting really should be honestly 30 minutes to 5 hours at most of visual novel stuff. You may very well not get that much variety. Even if you do get variety, I don't think there's going to be a lot of replayability. There's a lot of these games that I think are being published by a smaller selection of publishers than I would really think. And they may very well be going under multiple publisher names and multiple developer names. But yeah, they don't look terrible. Next adult game is also an adult game called Doomsday Robot Girl. In this one you have flat 2D anime girl with pink hair. She seems to be in a post-apocalyptic scenario, but there seems to actually be more of a gameplay mechanic to it than you would think. So I'm just gonna show a little bit of this off. Okay, so there seems to be items you can interact with, you can explore, you can interact, you can talk. There's attack, defend, damage, bond. This next screenshot seems to have multiple weapons. So yeah, it definitely seems like there's more of a product here. Noticeably, this game is also 92% very positive, with 55 reviewers, and selling for $9.34. It says it supports 15 languages. At a certain point, I probably should just put this on my wish list instead of my follow list. I can just not bother. It definitely feels like there's a dungeon crawling aspect to it too. Just really feels like there's an actual game here. The adult scenes look decent, nothing amazingly special about them. Yeah, I guess at this point I'm just gonna put it on the wish list. Now, what do I do about having an adult game on my wish list? Not much. Like, basically somebody would have to gift the game to me, because I can't imagine actually spending $9.34 on an adult game that I couldn't ever actually cover on YouTube. This is not one of those games that is going to be able to be censored easily. I'd have to do so much editing. Maybe if I became super popular and could hire an assistant, I could play adult games and have them more censored, or I could potentially have a different hosting site that I could put those gameplays on. Yeah, otherwise I don't know if there's anything I could really do there with it, unless it had some kind of censored mode in its gameplay description, which I don't think that it's likely it wouldn't have that. If anything, the one complaint I can have around Doomsday Robot Girl is that it is merging an adult game content together with a game that is actually slightly decent enough that that you would want to just have the game in a censored mode and just play the game. It's not quite good enough that you would just have the game without the adult content, but then also that puts you in that weird mushy middle where maybe you don't want the gameplay content and just want the adult content, and then you'd have to grind through a game you really don't want to play, which certainly is the argument for all the easy slide puzzles or games that are just kinetic visual novels. I don't know if this is spam or not on the chat. We are getting yeah, this is definitely spam. And I don't know if I triggered spam by looking at adult content, but now I'm getting adult content spam. Let's see on this. So we'll just report that. And hide user on this channel. But yeah, it's one of those title spam type things where it's a website, click go here, and you'll find love with our AI help. Last thing I would trust is AI as far as matchmaking. Is this next game an adult game? It does say it has suggestive dancing and nudity. Well, in this case, yeah, they're spamming emojis in particular. Hiding user on channel is seemingly not working because they're just spamming some more. Using a different channel with a similar name. And what they almost certainly do is they hack or just make these channels with very similar names. Move from one thing to the other. Alright, well, so you have this Rogue Kini Z where she's in the small bikini and shooting zombies. It's just kind of a low effort adult game that probably does have some nudity in it, but not enough to justify playing a bad zombie shooter game. And it definitely was not in the adult section of Steam, and arguably maybe should be. That being said, Rogue Kini Z at least looks more interesting than Small Z does. BC Bill. I'm just gonna have to check to see if any of these are adult games. BC Bill looks like an old Commodore game of no interest. And then the Dreamland Free. Is this an adult game? No, but it's yet another, like, let's put a 3D model in a bikini. Yeah, I don't get this mushy middle either. Like, this looks like an asset flip survival game with not a lot of effort put into it, and then they're just trying to sell it by asset flipping some bikini characters into it. And I just don't get the logic behind that. This might be the point where we are it might be the same publisher doing the same asset flips over and over again. It seems like that very possibly is the case. But it does certainly point out that if you are going to make an adult game, just make an adult game. Put some actual effort into it. Steam allows that. Quit trying to flood Steam with these middle of the road, it's going to be titillating looking, but actual garbage as far as the products. Archer's Pinball here. I would have to say no to this. There's just not enough visual here. I would much prefer to just play Sonic Spinball instead of playing what kind of looks like it's a too zoomed in, maybe mobile pinball game with far too many different types of collectibles. Gallahorn looks like it's an RPG Maker game. Not particularly interesting. XP Logo doesn't look like anything. Well, we'll get through all of this fairly quickly, I guess. Path of the Midnight Sun looks like a fairly nicely animated RPG game. And it's rated positive so far. So yeah, I'll give this a follow. And that may actually be the first one I make even a YouTube short around, since everything else I've seen and so far has just been adult games. Which that does kind of point out that the adult games I just saw were probably more Tuesday releases. Scrapyard Arena, I don't think there's quite enough here, but I'll give it a chance. If anything, I need to just be very generous with YouTube shorts anyways. Into the Flames is mixed. I am looking certainly for a fireman game, but the mixed reviews and the fact that it's on the fall list already implies to me it's come out of early access and done nothing with it. See, January 11th want to like it, but the game needs at least another year or two in early access. Too many bugs, almost unplayable, more and more bare bones than any other Man Thing game ever played. Not a single warp fire thrower in sight. Bad. Terrible tutorial for complex games, so insanely cumbersome, clunky UI. Yep, that definitely seems like there's enough here to say no to this. And this arguably points out that yes, you can get positive reviews in early access, and then once you come out of early access, those reviews drop down significantly. You're going from 90% positive to 64% positive once you came out of early access. Yep. So yeah, I don't think Into the Flames is a fireman game I'm looking for. We'll have to keep looking to see if there is one. I'm not even sure what Creative Console is, but it looks like it's something enough for a YouTube short and a follow. Truck World Driving School looks good, but again, I suspect it's come out of early access. We may start to see games just giving up and releasing out of early access in January, just as maybe that would affect like their taxes or something. Yeah, I could see businesses' taxes and accountings being affected by staying in early access one more year. Oh, Pan looks like garbage. Pushing Popo is just a ugly Sudoku game. Is this an adult game? Let's see. No. Limits Escape Room Games 2. Looks just like an asset flip. Not good enough. Atrio the Dark Wild. Seems like this is a Factorio type game, so I'll give it a chance. Like a Factorio game if you're using conveyor belts to feed an insane android robot. Which that is a slight twist, but maybe not that much of a twist in the actual gameplay. Darwin's Aquarium here. Looks too asset flippy. Our Land looks too much like an asset flip. Or just in general, not even an asset flip, it looks like a garbage survival game. Forest Fire. Yeah, there might be something to that. As I'm being incredibly generous around making YouTube shorts, I'm probably being incredibly generous around putting things on the fall list. Soul War game here might be something, but easily could not be anything. Let's see, Idle Banshee Alliance probably is nothing. Yeah, this is one of those games where I'd suspect the artwork here may have been stolen. In fact, I would heavily suspect that, although I can't see one to point out to be certain about. But yeah, not really interested in an idle game with anime waifus. Save the Earth. Yeah, there might be something there. Particularly any game that just looks even slightly different is getting a follow compared to so many things that just look terrible. This is a Japanese only typing game, so obviously I'm gonna have to say no to that. Horror Tale 2 Samantha. Well, I guess I would have to find out if Horror Tale 1 ever came out. See, Horror Tale 1 Kidnapper. There are also several other horror games this developer has successfully gotten on the wish list. Right, well, I'll put this on the fall list, but this also came out January 5th. So, if anything, I probably should dismiss it in that they are breaking up. They're either trying to make an anthology series, and the one thing I guess I'll give it credit for is that they are spreading it between at least 5 days. So I'll give it some credit there. But it does seem like Horror Tale 2 is a direct sequel to Horror Tale 1, and so he's asking for $10 in 2 purchases, which demos should be for free and should be mandatory for all games, arguably. So if he was to have given episode 1 out for free, that would have been way more generous than making you pay $5 and then feel the need to pay another $5 to get the complete experience. Collab Ball. It's kind of visually nicely polished as like a potential split screen, shared co-op, Marble Madness type game. But that's about all I can say for it. It still would be a no. Paradise of Desire is mixed and it's tagged as having adult content and having full Japanese audio, but noticeably there's no mature content being mentioned at all in the description. It's just tagged with hentai, sexual content, nudity, mature, and so it's probably severely censored. Obviously this would have been an adult game at some point, and this is a dungeon crawler aspect, which we haven't seen a lot of these adult game dungeon crawlers in the past 6 months or so, where they used to be very standard. So yeah, I suspect maybe there's very poor translation here and censorship happening here, although clearly there's not that much censorship since you have this leashed ball gag nun with a crown of thorns over her head and her arms tied behind her back. So you're definitely going to have lewd imagery at the very least. I guess just for my own interest, I'll put that on the fall list. Is this next game an adult game too? This looks like a Chinese game. Again, no mature content warning. It's mostly negative. Seems to be a kind of nice looking visual novel. So I would question why it's so negatively reviewed. Let's see if any of those reviews are in English. Nope. This might be subtly getting review bombed because it says something anti-Chinese or anti-Chinese government, or it may just be poorly written in Chinese or in Japanese, but says something anti-Japanese. I just don't know why it would be so negatively reviewed to start with. It's putting out a good foot forward, but I guess I don't care enough to actually put it on the follow list and follow it and find out if other people would review it. Let's see, next we have a game called Gross, which they say is a tower defense game in part, but it also looks like it's got some first person shooting elements to it, and it actually looks unique enough that I will give it a chance, even if it is a tower defense game and it is low polygon. Maybe I'm willing to make a exception here. Let's see, swimsuits and sexy clothes in this game, English only. Valkyrie Dawn of Ragnarok. Yep, this is really what I would prefer as an option, at least when reading visual novels, is to have a fairly solid background so you can read it. Obviously they don't want to cut off all the artwork of the characters and the backgrounds, and that's why almost always when you do see text it is see-through and you can see the art behind it, but that definitely makes it harder to read. This game in general is all over the place as far as quality of art. This quality of art looks terrible, where this quality of art looks really good, obviously, and then this gameplay mechanic looks terrible visually and as a gameplay mechanic, so really some inconsistency here. And I really am just having to check to make sure every single game is not an adult game. It just does not do a great job, Steam, as far as highlighting that. And I don't know if there's really a way to change that so much. This is just a horror game called Inhuman, which visually is not quite polished enough to work for me. In gameplay wise, I'm not really seeing enough of a gameplay mechanic to work for me. Block jumper doesn't look like anything. Car highway driving simulator, real parking drive, sim speed traffic deluxe 2023. Ridiculous naming convention. It's not like there really is even a lot of people that search Steam, so it's not like you're going to get search engine optimization by creating a ridiculously long name like that. This obviously is just an asset flip racing game. Last Night in Zombie Village looks like an asset flip zombie game. Candria. You're also just a million times better to make a game with a weird name than you are to have descriptive names that will never stand out in the crowd. Like, it might be somewhat hard to remember the name Candria, but if once you do start to remember the name of Candria, there won't be any confusion about what game you're talking about. This actually just looks like it's a frustration platformer game, so I'm a little reticent to even give it a follow, but it probably does deserve a YouTube short. We have about 10 more games to look at, and I guess we're moving closer to Wednesday or Tuesday as far as release dates. Well, no, we're looking at things that came out January 11th, and yeah, I don't think we're going to see another adult game in this stream. They definitely seem like they get bundled. Lost Empire 2097, I don't think it's quite polished enough. Midnight Alert. Yeah, I'm gonna be really generous, I guess, and make a short around that. Then Midnight Alert. What did I just look at? There's 2 Midnight Alerts. Like he listed the game twice. Or I somehow opened the same tab twice, which shouldn't be allowed. Orc Survivors. I did notice that as my macro was running today, it seemed like it was moving a little slow. So possibly it opened a tab twice because pages were just opening very slowly. Here we have that Children of Silent Town with more screenshots. Yeah. A lot of creepy imagery and not a general idea of what the story would be other than it would just be a point and click adventure game. Obviously this deserves a follow though in a YouTube short. Escape of the Pig makes a Sokoban box pusher a little bit more kid friendly and cutesy, but I still don't think there's quite enough of a reason that you would want to spend $2.39 on this type of game, and I just don't think this is quite quality enough. I'm not sure there's ever going to be just a box pushing game that would be good enough that I'd want to make a YouTube short around it. I guess if I'm just scraping the bottom of the barrel though and am desperate for more YouTube shorts, which maybe I will get desperate. I mean, I'm already up to 3. I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility to go to 4 or 5 if I have enough YouTube shorts I can make that way. I'd like to stick to 3 or even go back down to 2, but there's enough games coming out to justify 3, so we'll stick with what is reasonable and justifiable. Let's see, we have a game called Power of 10, which looks like it's a space game. Arguably, maybe I'm putting too many games on the follow list just because I'm making a YouTube short around them. They Came from the Sky 2. Interesting. They Came from the Sky 1. Let's see what the reviews are on this. This came out in 2019. It's rated positively. Well, They Came from the Sky 1 is just kind of an arcade game, but I would consider buying it if I was to buy both of them in a bundle. That being said, it does seem like prices are way too high at $9.74. This really should be a $1.99 type game from the looks of it, and it would be a hard justification to sell it at any higher price than that. On top of which, I would only really be getting the first game to highlight the second game, which would have to be very positively reviewed, which is an exact example of why things should be put on the follow list. That being said, this is an old game, so I'm not going to make a YouTube short around that. I do suspect I may accidentally create some YouTube shorts every now and then based on old games if I open new tabs. This is another one of those games that definitely is advertising itself like it's got a nudity and adult content in it, but there is no mature content information here. Is that possibly a case where the game publishers are just not following the rules and not putting in the information when they should? Or is it a case that it is just one of these Chinese bait and switch games? Obviously you have some loot outfits and bikini outfits here. but the vast majority of the game seems to be a hack and slash game with some asset flip dances too. And I wouldn't be surprised if you spend most of your time just fighting infinitely spawning enemies in this same arena over and over again. So calling it a relaxing casual game. I'd heavily suspect that this is of Chinese origin, but could easily be Korean or Japanese too. But yeah, not really a product here worth looking at. Yay, Fighting Girl. So that's not going to get a follow. Let's see, we have one of these puzzle games where you have to avoid the enemies. Yeah, I'll give it a chance. And see, this is once again, we're starting to see more sequels to games where the original game here has only like 20 positive reviews and looks like absolute garbage. So in doing that research, I'm gonna take this off the poll list and not even bother giving it a YouTube short, because the first game was so bad. Then we have a game here called The Search for Paradise, but they've missed Paradises, I guess maybe is what it's supposed to be. Obviously though, it is just an asset flip garbage game. So yeah, nothing there. Let's see, GameDeveloper.com. We're 3 hours in, and I guess we're close to being done, but not as close as I'd like. Says learn to grow with the industry with this guide on career sessions at GDC. As much as I hate the kind of cronyism and nepotism that probably exists by going to things like GDC, if you are a game developer, rubbing elbows and making connections at GDC is really the right move. So you really can't argue with that, particularly if you wanted to work in the game industry. Undoubtedly, you're going to have to compromise a lot in many directions if you are going to work in the game industry. And it really is an industry that requires a lot of passion, because people are going to exploit you like crazy. Unless you're just going to be a full indie person and not do business with anybody. But arguably, if you make an indie game and you haven't greased the right wheels, you're not going to get any press coverage, and then your game will never succeed. I think we already had talked about this. F1 Manager's underwhelming sales force a reset for their 2023 goals. Apparently, nearly all of the UK's 2022 game sales were digital downloads. They spent buying games from their phones or consoles instead of dealing with traffic and physical lines. A vast majority of the UK was under a severe lockdown also, so you can't get around that as far as just like severe COVID lockdowns. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of physical game stores were straight up shut down or locked. And yet, there is not a mention of that at all in this article from GameDeveloper.com. Yeah. We are almost certainly going to a nearly all digital future, despite the negative aspects of not being able to trade or resell, or not really owning the games that is going to lead to. And arguably, if the UK was going to be the spearhead of the idea of all digital game downloads, they probably should pass some consumer protection laws that they might pass something like this, where companies are forced to allow you to make physical backups that they cannot delete or revoke the license of ever if you download something. It's not that crazy to say, yes, you can plug in a USB stick to this game, and you can always play the game in its fashion, in the at least single player content, and that can never be forfeited in any way. I can see arguments for bad actors being banned from playing online, but there has been too many stories already of people being banned completely from ever enjoying a game whatsoever. The other thing certainly could be just if you get banned online, you should be given a full refund in actual cash. And that would be fair enough, I think, for most video game companies too, is that, like, if this person is so bad you don't want to do business with them, you can't take their money. You can't steal the money. Regardless if they bought the game 10 years ago and you're banning them now, they should get a full value of what they spent refund at that point. And that will put so much extra pressure on game companies to not ban anyone who isn't actually the worst of the worst, that we would see the ideas of toxic gamers needing to be censored or needing to be banned start to go away very quickly all of a sudden when they have some money that they could lose. Moving on, Curve Games parent company Catalyst Group has acquired a co-development studio called Secret 6. I don't recognize either one of these companies. Most of these mergers go that way, in which, yeah, they've not really worked on anything at all, or they're just not, they don't have much to their name. Seems like they partnershiped and worked on The Last of Us Part 2 and Cyberpunk 2077 as a third-party developer. And this is kind of a great example of what I was talking about several hours ago, of there being these third-party companies and third-party developers just not really getting credited for things they worked on. And maybe they don't really deserve that much credit, but they deserve a little credit. The tactical card battler Duelist has gone open source 3 years after its shutdown, which I didn't even know Duelist was shut down. That's nice to hear. You definitely don't hear that very often, but yeah, ideally you would want to see anything that's been just abandoned or shut down go open source. At a certain point, abandonware is that same concept, but abandonware as a concept really doesn't have a lot of legal protection in most countries, including the United States. They're talking about Ubisoft canceling 3 unannounced games again. Apparently, Warner Brothers has issued a takedown for Mortal Kombat 2 source code leak, which I guess means they still want to protect the source code for Mortal Kombat 2, which I guess that makes sense. They still would like to resell Mortal Kombat 2, and arguably the source code for Mortal Kombat 2 is not going to be very useful to many people. And then Xbox next update to turn systems carbon aware. I got rambling on a side thought around that. I'll be interested to see how this really gets implemented. By the way, the PlayStation 5 accessibility controllers also are not going to support PC. So this accessibility controller is being developed in collaboration, very possibly with the same company that made the Microsoft accessibility controller, and they've already gotten off on the wrong foot by saying it will not have PS4 support, it will not have PC support. It obviously is unlikely to have PlayStation VR support. It looks nice, but PlayStation is really tripping themselves up here. Alright, we're doing the follow list cleanup at this point. This one is from November, so I'll give it more time. Let's see, Bite at the museum. Could make an executive decision right now and say yes, or I could just give it more time. Run around a museum destroying things as a dinosaur. This really is one of those ones I guess I want to leave on the fall list because there is a general game concept of smashing things and breaking things that's probably better than this. Katamari Damacy comes to mind as that's probably a smarter idea around that than what this is. This is in a lot of ways a better example of asset flipping in which the assets really do matter and the visuals are somewhat polished, although the graphics don't look great and it does look like the camera is glitching quite a bit. But yeah, I'm going to leave that on the fall list and just not make a decision. Bitburner is a programming incremental game. I just don't think I would go this deep. Yeah, and I don't know why I have this particularly on the fall list when it's free anyways. Is there even any DLC around this now? This is just too much programming, I think, for anything I would want to play at this point. So I'm going to leave that. Bistro Days, I just put on the fall list. We're really going in circles. Biomutant came out in 2021 and it got advertised quite a bit and nobody likes it, so take it off the fall list. I have no desire to play bad games. Did that go away? Nope. Try and remove that from the fall list again. I don't know why all of a sudden I'm having network trouble. Just keep on clicking the follow button until problem saving and changes. Okay. It's like I haven't had any network drops as far as streaming. So it does just kind of feel like something else is running into problems there. I literally cannot take it off the fall list. Okay. I'll deal with that later, I guess. Billion Beat. Is this kind of a boxing game? Let's see. It's not very relevant in that but it is 86% positive of the 15 people who've reviewed it. So if this is out of early access, I guess I'll make an exception here. This definitely feels a lot like the boxing game for the Virtual Boy, which it wasn't too different from the boxing game with the Virtue Boxer, I think was the name of the Virtual Boy boxing, or Virtual Boxing, something like that. Yeah, I'm gonna make an exception here and put that on the wish list. Like, I assume that this isn't 100% a music rhythm game, but in a lot of ways, most of the boxing games that I do like are kind of rhythm games. They're pattern games more than musical rhythms, which the musical rhythm aspect is crazy, and certainly you have some very weird alien characters that I'm not sure I'd particularly want to fight as enemies, but I mean, you can't just completely copy Punch Out, which is what I'm really just looking for. Alright. Let's see, we have Bike Arena needs more time. I guess more and more we will get down to the point where I am just looking at games I just put on the fall list as the fall list gets smaller and smaller. This Big Rumble Boxing Creed Champions, I had hoped it would have gotten better, but obviously it didn't. This is actually Apollo Creed and Rocky likenesses, but yeah, that's not enough to justify putting it in a wish list. And arguably a Punch-Out game with these faces and these types of characters I guess would be more relatable, but these faces and the models don't look amazingly good. It's interesting too is that it seems like it's more of a side-scrolling boxing game like Mortal Kombat than it is a 3D boxing game where you would move around and a ring. Which, yeah, the footwork in boxing has never really been emphasized in any boxing game I've ever seen, where you would like move and dodge to the left and right, which I guess that would be the next evolution of something like that. I think we can say no to Big Klondike Classic Solitaire as just being too generic of a game. And then Bicycle Riding Simulator, even though it visually looks good, it's mixed reviewed, and I think I've given it enough time, so I'll take that off the follow list. And then BB Bots is mixed reviewed, so we can take that off the follow list. So then, can we get Biomutant off the follow list? Finally. Took multiple attempts. Alright, well, at 3 hours and 20 minutes, let me look at the new 15 tweets I have. I don't think I even need to do a Duel live today, so I will save time by not doing that. Alright, so very quickly, let me just scroll down. Let's see, 52 minutes ago, Wanted Dead Combat Explained trailer is available on Komatsu if you want to check that out. And that literally may be the only news. John Smeedley, the head of Amazon Games San Diego studio, is leaving the company. The former Sony Online Entertainment president has been with Amazon for 6 years. 6 years is kind of a long amount of time, but also he has done nothing with Amazon Games, so it's hurting his resume to stick around with them. Let's see. YouTube is updating and experimenting with having custom thumbnails for YouTube Shorts, which I feel like being able to pick a specific frame even from a for YouTube Shorts is just going to lead to a lot of clickbaiting, and that's one of the few things that was kind of nice about YouTube Shorts, is that you couldn't clickbait somebody into watching something, and you don't even really need to clickbait people into watching things because you're so likely to get random views no matter what anyways, the way the videos just pop up and they just keep on streaming down your feed. Alright, well, we started somewhat late, so it's not super surprising that there isn't any new news otherwise to talk about. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and give me a game off my wish list.